Everyone, if you're just welcome to Your Child, Their Future. Thanks so much to everyone for joining us for our webinar this evening. We're just waiting for everybody to arrive. So hopefully you can hear me loud and clear. Hope everybody's had a good day at work or home or school or whatever you've been up to. We are just waiting for everybody to get all connected, and then we'll get our webinar underway. So today we are talking very much about exams and exam pressure and exam stress and how to deal with it. I suppose primarily the children, but I know there will be many parents that will be tuning in today who will be feeling that stress too. Perhaps some parents who wish that their children felt a little more pressure, and then those who are perhaps worried that there's too much on their young person's shoulders. Also, it has been such a turbulent couple of years for young people, and I think we really have to acknowledge that before we continue with our experts tonight. It has been very unsettled for them. We'll have many of this year's A-level cohort who've never sat GCSEs. We have years 10, 11, 12, 13 facing into perhaps, you know, a turbulent couple of months ahead, and the uncertainty can lead to feelings of overwhelm and anxiety. And then, of course, further, the younger children, we have the P6s who are perhaps facing into a whole new transfer world, and what's that going to look like? So again, the unknown and the uncertain can lead to feelings of anxiety, but hopefully we can allay some of those fears and start to build good practice in the months ahead, and especially as we approach the Easter break, which I'm sure everybody is very much looking forward to. We'd be delighted if you can send your questions today for our experts. We are joined today by Andrew Toogood from Proclaim Consulting, and also from Inspire Wellbeing. We have Lisa Norris here with us today. If you have any questions about anything that Lisa or Andrew has to say today, we'd love to hear them. And I know the way these sessions can go, sometimes we get lots and lots of questions, and we will aim to deal with all of them during the time. We only have till 6 o'clock today, but we'll also have some fabulous signposting for you, lots of toolkits and handouts to send on to you afterwards. And if anything comes up, we'll do our very best to follow up on all of those emails too. So good evening to everyone who has joined us today. We are going to introduce our guests right now. As I said, we have Andrew Toogood from Proclaim Consulting. Andrew, it is lovely to have you with us this evening. I hope you've had a good day. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, about Proclaim Consulting, and perhaps your parenting situation as well?
Sure, Sarah. Thank you so much, and good evening, everybody. My name is Andrew Toogood, and I spend most of my day working in the whole area of leadership and management development, working with grown-ups, and that's a lot of fun. And we work all over the place with corporates and all sorts of stuff, helping leaders and managers to be the best version of themselves. I have 3 children. One has just finished education, my son, and didn't go to university, decided to start his own business, which has been interesting. We have one daughter who has just started into grammar school, and so that's been quite an interesting transition for her. And we have our youngest daughter who is in P6, and just this week started into the whole AQE test paper type situation.
Absolutely, yeah.
Today.
We've got a broad range of experiences right there, and as someone who just sent their youngest to university last year, and I'm waiting for her first year to finish. I can't believe that. So I feel everybody's pain out there. It's a difficult thing being a parent or a guardian, I'll have to say too. So Lisa, let's bring you in at this stage. So you work for the charity Inspire Wellbeing, but tell us a little more about that, your specific role and your parenting situation.
I will indeed. Thank you so much, Sarah. And it's a delight to be part of this webinar this evening. So I'm a training officer with Inspire Wellbeing. So Inspire is an all-Ireland charity and social enterprise. And the aim of Inspire is well-being for all. So within our services across Ireland, we support people living with mental ill health rather, and intellectual autism, intellectual disability and autism and addiction. So we have a range of services across the north and south of Ireland. And my role is primarily a training officer. So I'm here for a year and a half now. Prior to that, Sarah, my background is in social work. So I've 17 or 18 year experience in child protection and safeguarding social work. So as well as the parenting, which I'll tell you about as well, I've experience in working with children and young people, both in primary and post-primary, in a school counselling role, in a preventative education programme in primary schools, and recently working with young people around peer pressure. So I suppose for me, in the different roles that I have had, I've learned so much from the children and young people, and I continue to learn from them. So I'm hoping that I can impart some of that learning into what we're talking about tonight. My other hat as a mummy, I have 4 children at home. I have, yes, that's right. So I have, my eldest is 13, so he's in year 9. And that transition you were talking about, he was to complete the transfer, and that didn't happen in that year. So the change into secondary school was quite different that we had anticipated it would be. My second child, then I have a son in primary 6. And he's facing, equally, you've talked about the change in the transfer. I have a daughter in primary 4, and I have a son in nursery. So,
my goodness. And that's why you work full time.
Sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's easier.
Yes. Well, Lisa, and great to have that social work background as well, and that caring for our young people. I'm sure you'll add incredible knowledge to the evening this evening. It's super to see that we have 68 people joined us this evening. So obviously a lot of people very concerned about their young people. Why don't you tell us where you're joining us from tonight? Let us know where you are, maybe your own parenting situation, and keep the chat going throughout. So Andrew, I'm going to hand over to you now, because I know you have a short presentation for us, first of all, looking at the whole issue of resilience, how to build it in our young people, how to recognize the signs of burnout, very, very important, and how to recognize when the young person needs support. So I'm going to hand over to you at this point.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you, Lisa. So what I wanted to do this evening, I'm actually reasonably nervous when it comes to giving advice about parenting and children, because I don't know about you, I think if any one of us has got this thing nailed, then I would probably like to hear from you tonight. But I want to give you something very practical when it comes to the area of resilience and helping our kids, actually, even from, if you've got kids even in primary school, through to those who are at the top end of education, sort of A levels into university, with something that we help adults with. And often I think if we could help our kids at a much younger age to become resilient. And in fact, it's not even just about resilience. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we call mental toughness. And that sounds like quite a stark thing to say, but resilience essentially means your ability to bounce back. And the world talks about resilience all the time. And when we actually look at that particular skill, it's very important, because of course there are things that come into our lives which are challenging, which are difficult, particularly around exams. And having had one son go through that whole period up to the end of middle or upper 6th. We had a foster daughter as well with us from P7 through to the end of her GCSEs, and then she moved on. And even now, just going through AQE for now the 4th time, it's really interesting for me to go. When I looked at my own kids, I started to draw the lines to go, I need to help them quite practically to get to grips with something that we help adults with. And so what I'm going to do is I want to share this with you tonight. Hopefully, this is a conversation that I have with my own children, and I thought it may be useful for you too, to help them. It's rooted in the work of a woman called Carol Dweck, and she wrote a book called Mindset, and she talked about growth mindsets and fixed mindsets and how we respond to stressors and challenges. And if anything, the whole journey of school and education can be quite stressful, and particularly now as we're getting into exam season. What I discovered with my own kids, and they're not perfect in any way, but we started to talk to them differently about what was going on around them. And so, and honestly, particularly with the girls, we have found that it's been quite useful. Our son, sometimes we had to he needed a little bit more encouragement around studying, I'll say that. Whereas actually what we have found with our girls is that they tend to get really locked in. So they're even quite young, like wanting to do the very best. And either way, we felt like that they needed a different conversation around what was going on around them. So let me help you with this. I'll just kind of quickly explain for those of us who don't know. This is how, whether we're in P5 or whether we're in upper sixth, we are all kind of, made the same way. Okay, so let me help you with this. When it comes to resilience, where do we start? Well, we started to have a conversation with our kids around what happens when they're feeling stressed. What is that feeling? And what we started to explain to them was that your feelings are really important, but they're rooted in in your thinking. And so we don't ever want to deny how we're feeling, but our feelings were, what we started to help our kids with was to go, your feelings are pointing you towards what you're thinking about, because what we understand is our thoughts create feelings, and those feelings then create behaviors in us. So sometimes when it was our son particularly creatively avoiding studying as best he could, rather than getting cross with him, we started to take it back a couple of layers and go, what's going on there? And often when we started to have that conversation, the feelings of being overwhelmed, feelings of it all being too much, were driving him to sort of wanting to avoid things, because he was thinking, it's too much for me. I've left it too late. I'm doomed. And so what's the point anyway? And that sense of panic, the panic that he felt, meant that his behavior is quite avoidant. And so what we started to do was we started to go, listen, kids, you think, that leads to feelings, and that leads to behavior. So when you're navigating through, even with our daughter moving into grammar school and all these new subjects and everything so much busier than primary school, and lots of different challenges around social activity, as well as, and new friends, as well as studying, it was helping her to start to think about, how can I be resilient in this? Because I can't change the situation per se. I have to go to school. I've got to do my exams. I've got to get my work done. And so there's a little cognitive trick that I want to encourage you with tonight that helps you to have a different conversation and build resilience with your children. And we use it with big grown-ups all the time. And I remember talking to my wife, who's an executive coach, and saying to her, do you think this would work with our kids? And she's much smarter than me. And she said, absolutely. In fact, we really need to, I don't know what it's like in your house at times. We would have lots of tears, lots of, I don't know what I'm doing. And we just felt like, if we don't help them to cope better and to overcome and to become tougher, then this is going to not be pretty for all of us. So resilience is your ability to bounce back, which is really important. Mental toughness is how you get on the front foot and help yourself and help your children to develop the mindset of being, not just being able to cope with and bounce back from, but being able to thrive and recognize what is going on in each situation. So I hope that makes sense. And let me introduce you. This is something that I use every day. Now, I've only got about 6 minutes left, so I'm going to go really fast. And this is a trick that every morning, so what I do is I give my daughter a lift to school. And the reason why I did that was we needed to, and we'll talk about this later, we needed to create time where we could talk before she started her day. And so I rearranged my work. I'm lucky I kind of I own the business that I work in, frankly, so I can ask permission of myself. Can I be late today? Yes, you can. Thank you very much. And so what I did was I just carved that time out so that I could run her into school. And we sit for 10 minutes, okay, in my ladies' mile in Hollywood before she goes into Sullivan every morning. And we just have this conversation. And what we do is we use a quick trick, okay, just to talk through the day. And she doesn't probably realize it, but what we're doing is we've started to hear her say to us, I feel upset about this, but I realize what my thought is. And I need to reframe my thinking. I need to think differently about this. So here's the trick that we use. And what I would say is try it with your kids and become good at it. It's based on the work of this guy here. He's a psychologist called Albert Ellis. And he was a great man. And he did a lot of work around what's called CBT and all sorts of stuff. But it's very simple. And he called it ABCDE. So the first is how do we help our kids to thrive and start to grow a mindset where they're not going to be overwhelmed? Well, understanding first and foremost, they will have lots of activating events in the day. Those are things that just happen. They get a deadline, they get a piece of work, they have a test, they have they start to see things kind of, particularly this time of year when they start to see exams coming up. All of those events cause something on the inside of us. Remember, we think, we feel, and then we behave. And so what we find is that the consequence for our kids has been that they would either feel overwhelmed, upset, they can't do it because of what they're choosing to believe about that situation. So Hope, as an example, who's our middle child, she would initially, when she was making that transition and starting to get into a whole different set of exams, she would feel quite upset in the evenings. We would have to calm her down. I'd be running her into school the next morning because she believed, her belief was, the event was, I've got a test tomorrow. Her belief was, I'm going to mess it up. I'm not well enough prepared. I haven't done enough work. And so the consequence was all of these feelings running amok. Okay. Now, you and I do this as adults every day as well. So what we did was we started to talk to them about disputing their thinking. And this is a really practical thing to where you can start to build a resilient mindset. And remember, if you change thinking, feelings eventually change and behaviors then change. So what we encourage our kids to do in our house is to dispute their thinking, to challenge their thinking, to be able to almost label thoughts and go, I'm feeling this way. So what is it that I'm thinking about? I'm not going to deny the feeling because that would be quite, unhealthy in one respect, but I'm not going to let the feeling just be the sole place of influence. And so there are 3 ways that you can help your kids to dispute their thinking. The first one is this: ask them to consider, is it useful? So I'd say to Hope in the mornings, so how's that working out for you? Daddy, I've got this and this, and this girl said this, and how useful is that, Hope? Let me just ask you that question. Well, it's not really. How do you feel when you keep dwelling on that? Well, I don't feel very good. Okay, so what are we going to do about that? Well, what else are we going to think about? How are we going to capture that thought and turn it into something else? What could we be thinking about today? What are the things that you could be doing? How do you get that sense of agency back? Well, I don't use those words with her because she would look at me like I'm odd, or even more odd than what I probably am, right? But that's what's going on in my head. What can control the controllables and what can you put your hand to? Secondly, we go, is it logical? This is what a guy called Aaron Beck called the does it necessarily follow that? So sometimes with our kids, what they'll find, I find that particularly they get onto a roll and this is going to happen. And, before I know it, I'm just going to be at the bottom of the class and I'm just not going to do well. And we go, right. So just because if you have a bad test, does that necessarily mean, is that logical? Does it necessarily mean that you're going to be, at the bottom? That's not the way that it works. We're allowed to fail. Okay. And the last thing is, do you have any evidence to support what you're thinking about? And we're not as bold as, is that useful, logical, or evidence? But we ask around that in an age appropriate way. Like, how do you know? What would happen? What else could happen? And we get them to consider, their thinking and start to be quite, it's not even rational, but start to just calm them down to go, remember, all these feelings are just pointing to those thoughts. So why don't we challenge those? Because that will help you in the moment to be much, much more resilient and grow into it. So what, just to go back to Mr. Ellis, what he tells us is if we do this, then he ends up with the E, which is energizing new belief. Can I encourage you that we have started to see this with particularly with our girls, where we listened the other day, they were in the back of the car and we were driving to see, a family member, to see my mum and dad actually. And we heard the conversation between the 2 girls. It was really funny because the younger one said to the older one, there was a bit of toing and froing, and the younger one said, Hope, what are you thinking about right now? And how can I help you with that? And I was like, I hope they don't turn weird with this stuff, but it was a really lovely moment of them going, okay, you're feeling really upset. So where did that come from? Let's talk about that and see which way we could reframe that. So I've got 10 seconds left. So what I would really encourage you to do is to go, when we talk about resilience, we can, there's lots of different facets to it around balance and about challenge and all sorts of stuff. But if I could really encourage you to change the conversation that you have with your kids. They are much more open than what you would imagine to understanding themselves and being aware of themselves about the fact that their feelings actually they're not at the mercy of their feelings. Their feelings don't have to be the final arbiter of whether or not they're doing well in any particular day. They can learn to recognize that feelings are because of their view of the world. And using this to go, for our conversation, it's, you're feeling that. What are you thinking about? Where did that come from? And how could we help you with that? So there you go. There's just a quick 10-minute introduction to mental illness and resilience.
I tell you, Andrew, I love that Ellis ABC, and I've actually heard that it was used very much during the COVID crisis in the health service as a way to help people in the health service cope with the overwhelm that they were feeling when really they didn't know what they were dealing with. So a superb presentation, and I'm sure many people are thinking, okay, when it's that taking that step back, isn't it really? And just being able to go, let's just question those, let's just question the belief and look at the evidence, which I think is so important. Lisa, you were listening on to that there. Was that very useful for you?
Absolutely. And having those practical things that you can use and the suggestions around it, for me, what's really useful is to have a scenario where it can be used. And as Andrew talked about, you know, those conversations to and from school is often where you get us more information than sitting down to talk about something. So yeah, I think this those steps are, and having that and listening and thinking of the letters from A down, the practical side of that makes it more manageable and achievable for people to adopt those different strategies.
Absolutely. And just questioning whether, you know, is this a belief that I have? Is this really true? But yes, it is getting them to sit down and actually listen to you and not use words like agency and things like that, because I know my daughter would have just done a massive eye roll if I started to try. And it's how do you get to their level and that they listen. But wow, my goodness, you're going to have a family affair of executive coaches very soon, I would say. Some questions coming in on the question option. You're absolutely right. The chat is disabled. We are using Q&A today, folks. So if you want to send some questions in, a few to get us started here. How can you get your teenager to sit down to learn and prepare for exams when he feels he doesn't want to sit down to study? Oh, goodness. I think we're going to be coming on to that in a minute around time management. But how do you even get people to sit, Lisa? What would you suggest?
Well, I think when rightly what you're saying, Sarah, it's around that time management, and Andrew had alluded to as well, in terms of young people feeling overwhelmed, and that could be the reason that they're feeling unable to sit down to get started and thinking of this task, this mountain that has to be overcome. And I suppose for me, having as many practical and realistic options, strategies to work towards makes it more achievable, and supporting our young people, I suppose, is recognizing that particularly in exam period, it is a stressful time, and acknowledging that, as you have said, Andrew, your emotions and your feelings and thoughts will change, but we can do something about it together, and that young people don't feel alone in facing it. Yes, it's them that are sitting the exam, but they can be supported in that. And if thinking and planning for this event this evening and some practical things around that. So if someone feels that it's hard to get started and can't actually sit down, think about where's the best place to start. So things that maybe a topic or a subject that they have an interest in, and starting with that and thinking about the planning around that, starting with short bursts of study, factoring in breaks into that, but having, even prior to having the information to hand. So making sure you're caught up with all the information you need to have, what the exam is going to look like in terms of the form that it's going to take, and what you're being examined on. So to try and reinforce the confidence from the outset that in order to take a step forward, then you feel equipped to do so. Other things, working out what works best for you. So years ago when I was studying, I would have used acrostic poems as a way of learning, or maybe visuals, having flashcards or post-its, things that you know will help you retain information. And we're going to talk about it later on as well. But I think when we're supporting our children, young people, whatever stage they're at in their education, that they understand that we're making these suggestions coming from a place of support and identifying what the outcome will be. So if you invest time in this, you will have more time to do other things. You will feel more confident that you're getting closer to having all the knowledge that you need to have, and might offset some of the stress and the indicators of stress that they may be displaying. Other things I think as well around getting someone to sit down, back to Andrew, what you're saying, getting an understanding, setting time aside to talk about it. What is it that you're worried about? Is it the exam itself? Is it the influence of your peers? And what can we address first, and looking at realistic goals around that, and starting at the best point for our young people. And if someone is finding it hard to sit down and to focus on it, recognizing that breaks are important. We're not expecting children and young people to study for hours on end, because the retaining of information won't happen then. But if we can plan around managing time, that there will be time to do other things that you enjoy, but for the here and now, it's about supporting someone to get the best outcome and the exam that you're planning for.
I think planning is absolutely key, and good study habits. And for many parents, they might think, well, I didn't have the best study habits either, or, you know, and where do we find the time to learn what is the best thing? And every child is different too, Andrew.
Absolutely. That's great stuff, Lisa. What I would probably say is, if I take my son as an example, he was an interesting one, and he a bit like me. So one of the things, not to bore you with kind of science, but we need to be careful with our kids that we don't assume that they approach information processing the way that we do. So there are people who will have no problem taking the breadth of all of their subjects and studies and putting that into order. And there will be other people who just, like myself, I would have freaked out at that. So even through university, I was never brilliant at getting the breadth of something. And so there's a couple of things that just to say is, generally speaking, I think young people need more help than what we imagine in terms of taking something and breaking it into manageable chunks. And I think as parents, one of the best ways that I'm sitting here like an expert. My wife could hear me; she would go, "Yeah, dead on," because it was actually Penny who did the work on this with our son particularly, and our foster daughter. You know, was to sit down and go, right, let's take each subject and break it into really manageable units. Now, there's a brilliant technique. I don't have anything prepared on it, called Pomodoro. So you might want to write that down. And Pomodoro is a fabulous way of breaking their actual study time down. So just in that question about how do you get them to sit down, if it feels like you've got to sit down for 3 hours and learn stuff, particularly for boys, they're going to go, you must be joking. And look, we tried everything. We hid the PlayStations. We screwed the TV off the wall. I have bought more PlayStation controls and found them hidden around our house than I would care to, you know. It's like I spent a fortune on the things because my wife would hide them and then forget where she'd put them. And I thought, I'm going to be bankrupt by the end of this process. So we need something different, right? And so we use a technique called Pomodoro, which breaks down time into really manageable chunks and actually builds in a rhythm of breaking and getting out. It's particularly good for boys because it's not overwhelming. It makes big things smaller and gives them a really clear path. So there's 100 YouTube videos for free. Go find it. And lots of techniques there online. But I found that, you know, probably because it's like me, I need things broken down into, like, I can't eat the elephant all in one go. So help me to take one bite at a time. And
I think that's really important that you said that. And we've heard from a few people maybe mentioning boys, and actually that I looked like I'm not bothered or I'm not doing anything. The wheels will come off. I have a son as well. And I do remember it was lastminute.com the night before. Sure. And then suddenly we had a complete meltdown because the overwhelm is just so great. So the Pomodoro technique is definitely something that we could promote there with the boys. Yeah, and somebody's asking there, just to remind us, you mentioned a book. It's Carol Dweck, isn't that right? D-W-E-K. And the particular book, what was that? It's called
Mindset. It's absolutely fantastic. Listen, all the grown-ups here will love it. It talks about the difference between growth and fixed and how you can, you know, basically overcome challenge and develop commitment. It's the number one differentiator in performance. So that's what we do at our.
There's great stuff too from Matthew Said as well, Andrew. If anybody is familiar with Matthew, he would do an awful lot of work in schools with young people, and he was a champion table tennis player, and he talks about suffering from burnout and overwhelm and stress in advance of something, so performance anxiety as well. And I remember watching a fabulous interview with him on Breakfast News on the BBC, and he basically says to people, you know, what's the one constant? He literally would get to a final suddenly before the final, before he'd even hit a shot, he would start thinking of all the things that were going to go wrong, and he would go down the rabbit hole of catastrophization. He had himself homeless, living in a cardboard box because he would lose his sponsor, he'd lose his fiance, he'd lose everything before he'd even taken a shot. You know, he was worst case scenario. And then he thought, what was the one constant? And the one constant was, my mum will still love me tomorrow. And he started to work backwards. What is the one thing that won't change? So sometimes it is just breaking it down. And I notice Una Keenan has sent in a comment here. The flip or the reverse of that. How can I get my child to take a step back and be a child not so focused and stressed about schoolwork and always getting the A-star grades, which is such a big deal, which puts so much pressure, and they're putting pressure on themselves, not from as a parent. I'm trying to get my child to de-stress and looking for some help. So that brings us nicely on to looking out for those signs of stress. And, you know, when is somebody who's an A-star student and wants to perform really well, when does that go to being, this is a problem? Lisa?
There's a few things going through my mind when you're talking about that, and peer influence can, just when I have learned as my eldest son starts and goes through his teenage years, and the influence of peers. But I suppose in trying to encourage our young people not to compare themselves to others, and reinforcing the reality that exam results don't define you, getting that balance of encouraging and supporting someone to do their best, but success is not determined by exam results. You were mentioning indicators of stress, whether it's an emotional indicator, physical things that change, or behaviors that change. So if someone isn't taking the regular breaks, if we're talking about time management and encouraging breaks, if someone's spend too much time, having that conversation that actually having breaks will allow you to reinforce that information. It'll allow us to store it in our long-term memory, that you can save it in the bank for when it's needed. So again, looking at the reasons why we're encouraging to spend maybe not so much time, because that time over time invested in studying then doesn't allow things for, or doesn't allow time rather for other things that people enjoy. So the frustration grows. I suppose the other thing, and we talked about it earlier, taking time to listen to how some our children and young people are feeling, and actively listening. You know, if it's not the right time now to talk, going back and having that conversation about those thoughts and feelings, and get an understanding of where the frustration level is at, and encouraging them to break it down again. Maybe it is about managing time, and they can achieve all that they need to, but actually we need to get a balance if we're thinking about well-being and the importance of our well-being, and the exhaustion then that can accompany the exertion and studying for such a long time. It can be detrimental. So what they're trying to achieve by studying so much, they could be doing themselves a disfavor by not just taking that step back and investing a wee bit more time and relaxing and taking a deep breath. Different strategies that people can try to just take a step back.
How do you get them to do that, Lisa, though? Because I know, I'm even thinking my own sister is a medic, and you know, only the best would do. And, you know, my parents, I can remember them begging her to just take a break from the books. How do you actually get them to, maybe they've set out their study plan and they know they have to achieve it in this way because that's the way they've decided works best for them and they know best. How do you get them to step away?
I think again, it's recognizing and valuing the effort and time that they've put into that planning and instruction, but actually saying that being open and honest and saying, I can see that maybe you're frustrated, your mood's maybe changed, you're maybe picking up and highlighting to someone the indicators that you have noticed in terms of maybe their sleep pattern changing or their eating pattern changing, and having that open conversation. So it's not about discouraging studying, but actually it's back to that thing again about results not defining someone. So if it's things that, because I understand what you're saying, that someone is so determined and driven that actually that's their main focus, and I don't want to divert away from this at all. But small things like encouraging a short walk, doesn't have to be for miles or a long time, because that may then make someone feel overwhelmed, thinking, well, I need to be getting this done. But taking time to have a short walk, for example, again, emphasizing if you do that, it boosts your memory and your brain power. So it will help you in the goal that you're hoping to achieve. And encouraging them to to talk to us about how they're feeling, but their frustrations around what they're getting done, what they're not getting done, and encouraging that two-way conversation as much as possible.
Andrew, I'd love to bring you in at this point as well. Lisa's touched on a few things there on, the early indicators of stress, and also the importance of communication. And you beautifully suggested how we could build in that vital 10 minutes in the morning to have the conversation on the school run and make it a really helpful, focused conversation. And I love that. I'll definitely be using that going forward. But anything to come in there to help with the communication side of things, parent talking to child.
Yeah.
Listening and vice versa.
Yes. Well, I was just about to say that. What's interesting in this conversation is I think our kids generally are capable of more than what we actually consider they are, and I am all for, particularly when they get into that sort of late set, or even, not even late set, but middle secondary school 3. So a couple of things I would say. Number one, the whole thing of like when a child is working really, really hard. My brother was like, I was blessed with a brother who was smart and a hard worker. That was a great home for me, who was once described as a toity loiterer on the path of knowledge by my A-level history teacher. So I always had this kind of like pressure, and even in my own house. And then as I got older, I started to understand something that, I would have got very frustrated. So I'd say, particularly for boys, when even men, when they're older, when men are hurt or they're panicking, it will normally come out as anger and stuff like that. So you'll see that manifestation of emotion. And rather than go toe to toe with that, for me, that's a big siren for actually you're upset about something, or I don't care is normally I'm upset. So here's what I would say. There's something going through my head in that. If you got to, like, the conversation needs to look something like this. So to Una's point, the truth about human performance, and again, this is what we do with big grown-ups. It's like it is impossible to operate. We have this lie, particularly this perpetuated in business and grown-up life, that you on a Monday morning and to Friday 5 o'clock, you kind of work like this. You and I were not built like that. And so what we started to do, particularly with our foster daughter at the time, because she was really conscientious, we started to say to her, look, as Dan Pink describes in his book about human motivation, Drive, it's called, it's a great book. He says, here's what science knows and here's what business does. Okay. So here's what science knows and here's what we do as parents. Okay. And there's a gap between them. And so what we have to do is we have to explain to our kids that whenever you go past a certain period of time and you are still in the books, you're wasting your time. You're not taking it in. Your brain is not, there's a thing called cognitive load theory. Just take that down and go and read about it. Your brain will only take in a certain amount of information. And then it's like feeding a baby chocolate cake. It's going to bulk it back up. Excuse the expression. Okay. So our kids are buying into a lie that, it's about the amount of time that I sit here with an open book. And this big plan that you described, Sarah, actually what science tells us, and if we could educate ourselves a little bit better around how much our brains are capable of in short bursts, we can actually help our kids to go, you know what, this may feel like you are being a little bit lazy, or you're not working as hard as anyone else, but actually you're working way, way smarter, because there is a point, let me give you, what's a real life example? Rugby players. There's a great example. Have you ever followed a rugby team and you're disappointed that the guys who play for Ireland are not playing on the pitch for Ulster the next week? Well, why is that? Because they understand human performance. They understand that I can't operate at this level all the time. I work really, and here's the key. Have the conversation about not just what work is, but what is recovery. Because stress is, it's about recovery from those moments. So if you're going to bang it out for 3 hours in mathematics, then you need to really think it's as much part of your learning to have a recovery period in your timetable and enjoy it and figure out what it is that makes you decompress. If it's walking, brilliant. If it's binging Netflix, whatever it is for you, it's going to be different for everyone. But we need to widen the conversation and show them that the limits of their performance, and to go, it's rest, recovery, as well as those moments of pushing in.
And maybe even reward at times, because I know I respond very well to, yes, you did very well. Now you can have a nice thing. A treat.
Yes, absolutely.
So 3 hours that we've just come on, rest, recovery, and maybe even reward. Great questions coming in there. I'm studying a master's degree as well as trying to be a single father to a 14-year-old daughter. I'm trying to give time to my daughter. It's a difficult time. It's challenging with work commitments, which I'm sure it is. Do you have any tips to support her and also incorporate joint ways to talk about exam stress? I'll throw that out there, Lisa. Obviously, we've covered quite a bit in there, but I wonder, would you have any specific advice for that particular person?
And I suppose what we're talking about is what we need to invest time in ourselves, you know, the strategies that we're suggesting for young people to do. And it is difficult in spinning all those plates. I suppose it's finding the time to, you know, within the busyness of life, to have those conversations and find out where, and understanding where each other are at.
Absolutely. And I suppose Andrew has outlined as well that now we know how to have the conversation, we know the questions to ask, and we know to encourage them to work smarter and encourage them to rest. I think we need to understand that we don't need to be literally sitting with the books in front of us morning, noon and night. And I think COVID has taught us all that we can work in very different ways and still get very good results. So fantastic. So, you know, peer pressure has come up as well. How big a problem do you think peer pressure is at the minute, Andrew?
I think it's really dependent on either schools or groups of, you know, we had two kids at the same school, and quite an academic school, but my son's group probably less concerned than others. I think that than our daughter's group has been. I think undoubtedly it is an issue. And one of the things that we have really encouraged our kids to think about, I'm not saying it works for everyone, is to go, what works for you? And, you know, somebody else, and can I just say this? I don't know whether it's appropriate or not, but you know what, I'm going to say it anyway. Half the time, I think, you know, we would say to our kids, look, when people tell you that they're studying for 18 hours in the evening, they're probably spoofing. All right. And so don't believe everything that you hear. It's like, and even when you do hear it, you've got to understand that you're different to them. So what works for you? And it's that uniqueness about our kids. So we said, you know, particularly with our son, the end result of that was he didn't go to university. He started a business because we had got him into a routine of going, I'm not going to do what everyone else does. And so that was the end result of a number of years of going, who are you? What are your values? What matters to you? What's important to you? Not just what do you want to do, but who do you want to be? And we had that conversation and going, like, not just about what you want to achieve, but who are you? What's important? What would you like people to say about you when you're not in the room? And we started to get them to, you know, and we're doing that with our younger ones at the minute as well, to go, like, who are you? You know, what are your values? That's what we say to older people. What makes you really special? And so it's not about comparing myself to others, but it's about being very confident in who I am. And I'm going to be different to everybody else. And you know what? A lot of our work is around diverse thinking in our business. And we have talked about that with our kids to go, you think differently. And it's perhaps no better, no worse than anyone else, but it's unique to you. And you bring something that nobody else brings. So it wasn't so much about, you know, in tackling they're doing all these hours. We were like, yeah, probably they may or they may not be. Who knows? We have no evidence for it. However, who are you? What makes you important? It's special. Where do you want to go? What is the best version of you look like? And why don't we just control the controllables, which is who we are, and let everyone else figure their stuff out?
Lisa, do you have anything to add to that?
I was nodding for the duration of you were speaking there. Andrew, absolutely agreeing. And what was going through my head was that tendency for young people to compare themselves to others, whether it be how long someone's studying for, where they're at in their revision, if they've had predicted grades, and comparing, feeling that you have to get certain results to go to the same school. But bringing it back to the point, I suppose recognizing that and I'm thinking of my older child in particular and how strong that influence is. Unfortunately, he's more influences than his parents. So and I have to just accept that for now, but not to avoid those conversations as well, as you have said, Andrew, to reinforce that actually you are unique and you have so many things that you're good at, and to Now you're talking about eye rolling earlier, Sarah, it may be received with eye rolls and may not land well, but in saying those words and reinforcing that they do accept that, and that they have so many things, so many positives for them. But also, I suppose what I was thinking of as well is identifying and helping our children and people to identify what's unhelpful for them. So maybe if it's unhelpful for them to ask their friends how long have you been studying for, or equally in the flip of that, if they're asked that question, there's a way of diverting it because they don't feel then maybe under pressure to say they've done less or done more. So something that they're comfortable with that doesn't add to possibly more pressure.
Here's one I want to throw out there, and it's kind of not on the list, but would you say that parents sometimes can get way too stressed about this and it's not necessarily good for the child, Andrew?
Yes, 100%. I think our kids, we live in East Belfast, and I remember the headmaster of the primary school that they went to, Strandtown, he started a P7 group parents meeting by basically talking to the parents for 10 minutes saying, you guys need to wise up. You know, if your child doesn't achieve at this stage, they're not going to turn into whatever. And I think we need to question ourselves in that, to go, look, I'm a firm believer the world is so different today. In Northern Ireland, what we've been typically very good at is there's this pressure to go, you know, primary, grammar or whatever, and then university, and then you kind of figure out life. The world has changed massively in the last 10 to 15 years. There are opportunities for our young people today, which quite frankly, you know, and I'm pretty old, right? They never existed for me. You know, when I was at Queen's, it was towards sort of, you know, Good Friday Agreement, all that kind of stuff. And we just didn't have the opportunities. And I think parents sometimes aren't aware of that. I think schools, quite frankly, are not great at showing the breadth of what is available. And if we could get a bigger sense of perspective that there are technology companies today like Allstate, who are a magnificent company, have opportunities for people, you know, in all sorts of different areas. We have American FDIs coming into this city, popping up everywhere. We have, you know, we live in a very connected world where you can work internationally and live here in all sorts of areas, which are not medicine, law, or engineering or whatever. And so what I would say is that, and if kids want to do that, fantastic. But what I would say is parents, don't be under, like, I'm saying this and I nearly had apoplexy when my son said he wasn't going to, you know, so I'm not sitting here like we've got this worked out. When he said, I'm not going to uni, I said, just go to uni and figure it out when you come home, you know, we'll do that. And then you can, when you grow up, you can decide what you want to do. But he was adamant. He said, no, I have a business idea and I'm going to do it.
Wow. Now, what's he doing? What's his business idea?
So he does videography and drone flying for people like, he's out today working with the Fire and Rescue Service, doing all their corporate video work. And he works with people like Tourism NI and lots of marketing companies, and absolutely, he's doing great. Okay. Now,
but it is that conventional path that we think university is the holy grail. And look how much, you know, when I think back in my day too, it was okay to get a B. B students were actually quite cool. Bs were good. And it meant that you had a bit of personality going on and you could have a bit of fun and you didn't take it too seriously. But there's such pressure to get these A stars now.
And honestly, Sarah, if I could really encourage people, the world is very different out there. Our kids have phenomenal opportunities today, which don't necessarily mean they need to smash it. Honestly, they don't. And I think we can understand that a little bit better, because certainly we don't want to, by osmosis, our kids to be picking up that sense of pressure in addition to everything else from their parents. And so I'm pretty relaxed about our next two, you know, in terms of what they're going to do, because I just look at the world today and I go, the world changes quickly, and opportunities present themselves that perhaps we're not.
Jobs are plenty that can't get filled. All the new jobs and the new future. Loads of questions coming in, and I'm very aware that we've only 10 minutes left. A question from earlier there. How can you guarantee a great future ahead for a child who is intelligent but doesn't feel he needs to put the effort in with regards to grades? Maybe that's just what we've been talking about right there.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's my son. Whoever said that, I've had one of them.
Well, I had one of those too, and he got a BBC in his A levels, and he wanted to work in TV. He said, perfect. You know what? He's working for ITN in London now, so, and he's fine. Brilliant. Let's just go down. There's a few coming in now, and we're back to those indicators of stress. Lisa, I'd like to, for those people who do have serious concerns, there's a couple coming in here, feeling that their kids aren't coping. Can you give us the kind of red flags here that we should be looking for?
I suppose if I'm thinking it in its broadest context, if we're noticing a change from how your child or young person has been. So as I was saying, if it's changed in their feelings or in their emotions, something physically changing that you're noticing, or a change in their behavior. So for example, if someone is shutting themselves away, the change in becoming more withdrawn from friends and family, not doing things that they did enjoy before, they're the things that were important indicators that as an adult that we would be more aware of, and trying to pick up on those indicators for young people as well, or a change in their behavior. So exam period and revising is going to bring an element of stress, but over and above that, so that increased frustration, that prolonged frustration, and feeling really overwhelmed, and it impacting then on their mood. So and for a longer period of time, that their mood doesn't seem to be lifting again, and it's continuing to stay low. As was mentioned earlier, change in eating habits, whether it's overeating or undereating, and we talk about the importance of breaks, but also the importance of being hydrated and getting brain food on board. But if someone is particularly overwhelmed and food is not a priority, then we need to be aware of that and see how we can support young people if that has become an issue, or other things. And I suppose it's getting that balance, Sarah, as well, recognizing that things will change around periods of stress, but noticing that ongoing change. And from people that we know so well, that we can pick up on indicators over a period of time, maybe headaches, physical things like headaches, or if my children are worried about something, having or pains in their stomach, that again, as adults, we can maybe relate to, over emotional and easily upset and crying a lot, unable to concentrate. Again, back to the importance of breaks, but not being able to retain the information. So if we are adopting the strategy of helping our young people study and talking through questions and things that they've learned, but they're unable to remember it and retain that information. And even thinking about back to the breaks issue as well, someone that's not taking a break, they're wanting to, Andy, you were talking earlier about just being so engrossed and they're studying and not having or not feeling able to step back for a while. I have to do this, I have to do that, and the feelings of anxiety then fueling.
There's a couple of questions have come in. One father there who has a child has a statement and studying for exams. Is there anything there? There's also a question up. Somebody else said, any difference in advice or approach for a neurodiverse child in how to help with supporting, just to give as nice a home life as possible. I suppose that this is a place of recuperation and rest and recovery, rather than a threatening place, that bedroom and that study. Lisa, anything there about advice for people who find things even more challenging perhaps than others?
I think it's recognizing who is within our support network. So I think as parents, we often feel that we have to resolve everything and fix everything, particularly if our children are struggling. But in terms of a child or young person with a statement, speaking to someone in school, if it's someone within the SENCO or designated person in school that can support that young person, and maybe come up with a plan or different strategies that can be used in school and outside of school. So the young person feels supported in school and parents feel supported at home, because as you were saying, that stress and overwhelm then has an impact on us, on parents, and it's important that we pick up on that as well. It's hypocritical if we're encouraging our children to invest time in self-care, and can be easier said than done, but that we do that ourselves and feeling that we have others to go to.
a very specific question here, and I'm not sure if you can give advice, but I definitely feel for this person. Hi, I'm an Indian father, and the old joke about Indian parents wanting to be doctors, etc. His daughter wants to be a graphic designer, and I'm encouraging her to follow her dreams, but culturally she feels pressured about not doing a career which her culture sees maybe is not as appropriate as being a doctor. How do you get someone to follow their beliefs and their dreams and not just what culture dictates? Andrew, would you like to tackle that one?
Not really, to be fair. No, but that's real. I mean, that's a real pressure. I think, look, even with the conversation is, look, what do we want? What's our definition of success as parents?
Exactly.
Like I want my kids genuinely to be well-rounded, happy, contributing to society, and loving what they do. Okay. I want them to be happy and healthy. And I deal with enough people in my business who find themselves at some particular point in their life, stroke career, and they're unhappy. They kind of feel like this imperceptible drift of life. How did I get here? Why am I doing this? If I could, do you know what? Ask you, we probably all could do this. If we consider, you know, where we are today, is this where we wanted to be? Probably not. Could be generally, but you know, like what would it look like if we were really doing what lit us up? And what I would say, see with your kids, you know, I think going through it with our son, and I look at him now and he's loving what he does. I kind of feel like my challenge was to go, my job as a parent is to get them to the stage where they are happy, adjusted, contributing, and loving it. And it's like at some point I had to say to myself, well, who cares what other people think? Because their measure of success is not our measure of success. And we've got to ask the question, well, as parents, what does success look like? Does it look like just keeping up with the Joneses? And I know that's hard from a cultural point of view, but whether it's Indian culture, actually Northern Ireland culture, quite frankly, can be just as tricky, you know, with, if I can speak very frankly, you know, but there comes a point where you go, I will exhaust myself trying, you know, sacrificing my life on the altar of other people's expectations is probably not something that I want for my children. But you know what, if she's going to be a graphic designer, it's a girl, yeah, I would say, just you do everything you can to make sure she's the best graphic designer that ever picked up a pen or went to a computer. And
absolutely. And then watch that BBC program, This Is Going to Hurt, and you'll be really glad that she didn't.
Yeah, very good.
Right, we are nearing the end of the session today. This could go on forever. It's absolutely brilliant. Lots of great tips there from people. I found by doing a hobby with your child, maybe doing photography, encouraging them to participate in something outside of sport, encouraging their well-being, bike riding with them, you know, is a nice thing to do. Again, to have that retreat at home and something that's not just somebody there with the big stick, if that's your child, if they're working too hard. Folks, thank you so much for attending today. Thank you to Andrew for the brilliant presentation, the ABC, the conversation, the asking those questions, you know, have we any evidence here? Is this logical? Is, you know, getting people to think and reframe how they see the challenge. And to Lisa there with those signs to look out for if your child is perhaps studying too hard, putting themselves under too much pressure. And then again, is it smart? Because kids want to be smart. And if they think I'm wasting my time here not being smart, then we need to do something different. But I want to say good luck to each and every one of you. Before you head off, we'd love to see if we have another of these webinars, is there any particular topic that we could help you with? I don't know if we have an actual poll, folks, do we tonight? Sometimes we have a poll. I don't know if anybody's going to speak to me at this point.
No poll tonight, Sarah.
No poll tonight, but if there's any subjects, the question and answer box is still open. If you want to send us in anything that you would find a useful webinar. Our thanks to our key speakers today, to Andrew and to Lisa, and our thanks to the organisers, again, Allstate, EY, EverQuote and PWC for taking the time out of their busy days to put this on for us. And good luck to everybody out there. Remember, let's redefine what success looks like. Let's be happy and let's be healthy. That's number one. Thank you so much and take care and have a lovely evening.